Penn State COMMversations is a podcast produced by the Donald P. Bellisario College of Communications. Episode topics range from the people, programs, and events that shape the Bellisario College to discussing key aspects of life in the professional world for young and upcoming communications alumni. Please enjoy this episode of Penn State COMMversations.
This episode of the podcast features Assistant Teaching Professor Kevin Hagopian. So it's award season in Hollywood.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Is that an exciting season for a film faculty member and a film, someone who appreciates film?
It is, and it's interesting that it's only within the last 10 years or so that I think we've been able to talk about something called awards season, where either entities like the crafts and guilds, like the Screen Directors Guild, or the Directors Guild of America, the Screen Actors Guild and AFTRA, where sometimes these entities have given awards in the past, but they haven't made a spectacle of it. And of course, the granddaddy and the grandma of all of this is the Oscars, and so the more we get another awards show, the more it encourages other awards-giving entities either to invent a set of awards. It encourages other organizations to invent awards or to make a bigger spectacle of the awards they give. And some of those, like the Independent Spirit Awards, for instance, have really, which are awards given to the better independent films, of course, of the year, have really helped, I think, to stretch the public's understanding of film art. I love the fact, for instance, that the Screen Actors Guild gives an ensemble cast award. That kind of thing is the public's encounter with at least a version of what we do here at Penn State in terms of film studies. It gets people to think more profoundly about not just the individual movies that they like, but the art of filmmaking. So I think it is a really exciting time, and increasingly, and you see this very much with the Oscars, there are films making it onto the short lists, that is the list of nominees, that otherwise would not have a mainstream audience. Or they're just films that are appearing either from international sources or from the margins of the Hollywood cinema industry, that the award itself or the nomination is their ticket to a larger audience, and that's all to the good.
How do you consume the awards shows?
Mm-hmm.
Do you watch them as much as you watch the films?
I typically will watch the Oscars, but I tend to I'm kind of for myself. I'm more about the payoff for the other awards shows, and frankly, I'm less interested in the winners than I am in the nominees. Again, I'm kind of trying my best to keep a big picture mentality about what nations, for instance, are starting to develop film industries where there is that are really hitting that sweet spot where they're not only making popular cinema for their own audiences, but they're also making really quality artistic films that might have an international audience. Iran is a really good example of that kind of a film industry. So, yeah.
On the Oscar nominations,
Mm-hmm.
what do they say about? Do you see, having looked at those?
Mm-hmm.
Do you see a trend there, or what? Is there an arc line through there about what they say about us?
Well, I think there's all kinds of good news. The most important is the internationalizing of the awards themselves reflects the internationalizing of of movie tastes for people. There's always been a fair amount of complaining, some of it good-natured and some of it really incisive, about the so-called Hollywood film industry's domination of screens in other countries. And I say so-called because the Hollywood film industry has always been a global industry from its beginnings. Literally, during World War I, it began to be especially globalized. But there's finally a lot of traffic in the other direction, where we're getting films several years ago, like Old Boy, The Host, and most recently Parasite, all from South Korea, that are finding something like mainstream audiences in the U.S., aided by ways of circulating film other than just movie theaters, streaming services. So it's the internationalization of again, I keep using the word mainstream, but I'm speaking now of lots of people, including myself as a moviegoer, where the awards, the Oscars have I think really driven a greater internationalizing of the domestic screen space in America.
In terms of the nominees,
Mm-hmm.
and that international perspective
Mm-hmm.
is great. The other thing we hear is who wasn't nominated.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Whether they be male or female, or how diverse they are or
Right.
aren't. The nominees come from other members of the Academy, correct?
They do.
So when we try to broaden that to society,
Yeah.
how dangerous is that, or is it correct? When they say, "Hey, Oscar's so white," well, the folks that nominated them are sitting in the audience.
Yeah.
So if you were to go to the stage and say, "Hey, could you?" How do you wrestle with that, or what does that mean, if anything?
Well, I think it's very significant, but maybe not in a really simple way. In other words, I don't think anybody would feel like that either the cause of art or the cause of social justice would be solved by some good-natured quota system of some kind. But the fact that it matters is the fact that the representation of racial and gendered minority populations in the body of nominees, the fact that it matters shows how important the movies are. It wouldn't matter what that movie was about. Moonlight, for instance, Barry Jenkins' film. It's not so much what the film is about as the fact that that audiences feel a stake in the process, in this very important representational process, by having a member of their ethnic or identity group as the named filmmaker. But so I think that just speaks to how important movies are as a symbolic as a symbolic icon or node in our popular culture. I think what's more actually important than whether or not a director, for instance, was female or male or transgendered or African American or Chinese American or whatever, are the trends in the general diversity of the Hollywood industry in particular. So it's not just are we getting more female directors, it's also are we getting more female grips and electricians and casting agents and people on the financial and bonding side of the industry. Are we getting a greater international representation in those areas. So, because movies are, yes, they're a director's medium, and yes, they're a writer's medium, but they're fully collaborative. And the more diversity we generate, not only from the top down, but from the bottom up. The last credits, not just the first credits that you see at the end of a film, I think the better that is, because it, in the long run, is going to give us, I hope, a different, just a wider variety of movies being seen.
When the Oscar nominations are out, how do you look at them, and then do you go back and say, okay, now I've got to see this before it happens?
Oh, absolutely.
What's your process?
Yeah, again, I'm not any different than any other movie viewer in that sense. For instance, this time around, although I had been planning to, I hadn't seen 1917. So last week, me and everyone else in State College lined up to see 1917, and I'm very happy to say that it was sold out, which is a good sign, particularly for a movie that has visual spectacle. To jump to a question that not just you, Steve, but lots of people ask me, is, do you think movies should only be seen in movie theaters? And sometimes I think they're hoping that my answer will be yes, but it's really no. I don't think that that's a necessity. I think it's a real advantage when you have movies that are physically epic, like 1917, or visually so intriguing and eccentric, like Roma a couple of years ago. Then it really helps to have more space and high quality projection and a rich audio environment. But I'm just happy that more people are seeing a greater variety of movies than ever before. At least we have the opportunity to do that. I just received an email from a Penn State graduate of several years ago who's working in the media industries, and he said, I still find myself watching the movies that are put in front of me via large advertising budgets than I do searching for movies at the margins. And he was kind of joking with me and saying, I'm the guy who's supposed to be able to find these and be interested in finding these more eccentric and obscure movies. So I think there is still, I have the same concern as a lot of people, which is it's really exciting to see the latest blockbuster, but as filmmakers, just recently I saw an interview with Renee Zellweger, whose film Judy is one of several films with really spectacular performances nominated in this Oscar cycle. She was concerned, and I am concerned that the interest, the cultivated interest in blockbusters, does tend to take a lot of the air out of the room. In multiplexes, the latest Star Wars episode, for instance, will often take up not just one screen, but 2 or 3 screens at the same time. And it's just my hope that there'll be a greater pressure from audiences, because that's where it'll need to come from, to simply have a more diverse selection of movies available.
On the flip side of that, what's your sense of the Oscars, the Academy's challenge with honoring or not blockbusters, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's the Avengers, whether it's Star Wars,
Sure.
They've added nominees to make the show, the presentation more appealing. And then when people go, so many people see those, and then they're not reflected in the award show. What's your sense of that balance and they're wrestling with there?
I think it's important to remember that while the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences is not the same organization as it's not technically the trade organization of the motion picture industry. That's the Motion Picture Association of America. What but they do the Academy does function as a kind of an auxiliary to the Hollywood film industry, and one of the it certainly began that way. Let's put it that way. The Oscars, the Academy, never had in mind as never imagined when it was founded that it would serve as broad a cultural function as it serves now, and that it would be the source of such or the site of such concern about issues beyond the screen, like social justice. So, one of the theories behind the question of nominations has always had to do with, okay, well, yes, we're recognizing film art, but let's also realize that our success has been as an event and as a show and as news has been so extraordinary that we're going to drive admissions for films that come into a second release as the result of the nominations. And so the thinking has always been, does the Rise of Skywalker need our help to get people to see it? Those are movies, the Harry Potter franchise, for instance, the entire Marvel and DC families of films. Those are films which are described as critic-proof. No one is going to be. No one is going to breathlessly open their New York Times site to see whether the Times liked The Rise of Skywalker. And likewise, a nomination is not going to affect their fortunes. So in the past, there has been often a kind of a prejudice against the blockbuster films. On the other hand, they've never had any difficulties with scoring nominations in some of the technical areas, which is just as it should be. My own opinion of Rise of Skywalker is that it's one of the most visually stunning films I've ever seen. So I think I think the Academy voters are trying to do what any of us who have ever been faced with a lot of overqualified applicants for a short number of spots. They're trying to do their best. And I think recently, in the last, I would say 10 years or so, there's been a recognition of that prejudice. Like, ironically, we shouldn't condemn the latest Marvel movie because of its popularity. If the sound mix or the acting or the makeup and hairstyle attributes of that movie were good, well, we should recognize it.
Is there, among this year's nominees, movies and top, what we consider, generally top categories, is there a stone cold lock in there for you? Something when you saw it, you said, oh yeah, this is, when it comes time, when the show's on Sunday night, this is going to win, no doubt about it. Is there anything in the categories there that you think rises to that level?
I would say that in the acting awards, Renee Zellweger's Judy, and I'm going to hedge my bets here. Oscar always likes character plays, and by that I mean movies that would be unimaginable without their protagonist, and wherein we see the most radical changes and emotional swings being demonstrated on the screen. The Bette Davis part is what I would call that. And I think in the case of Judy, Renee Zellweger's performance is pretty hard to top in that area. But if you look at the Golden Globes, it was topped by Awkwafina in Farewell, which is a completely different performance, a very subtle and restrained performance, and Awkwafina's performance in Farewell, and many people are complaining about this, was not nominated for an Oscar. So the last time I hit on all four major categories was 1979. So if people are looking to make money off of Hagopian's prognostications, I think they would be better off asking their 3-year-old.
Is there a nomination in those top 4 categories that surprised you?
Can I look at my cheat sheets?
Sure.
Okay, yeah. Of the big categories, well, first of all, I love the expansion of the Best Picture nominees to a longer list than the ancestral 5. I guess the fact that a movie that I would call a small movie in which nothing happens, Marriage Story, I think is a really nice surprise and a recognition of a filmmaker, Noah Baumbach, who's been very well known among independent filmmakers, among people who are real, because he's a writer-director, who are real curators of some people have even called them miniature films about a few characters in a tiny narrative space. So that was a nice surprise. Parasite, I think, it's an excellent film, and I'm just thrilled that it's been nominated. I'm like everybody else. I'll grouse in a particular year. My film didn't make the list, but Parasite is a film that I think is absolutely worthy and an example of a really creative choice by an institution that not so long ago was criticized for intolerance of any foreign films outside of Europe. So that's one. I guess I would also Jonathan Pryce in The Two Popes, an example of it. Somebody could come right back and say, well, Oscar's always had a fondness for English actors, and that's true. But Jonathan Pryce is really an actor's actor, and I'm glad to see him get a nomination after all of these years.
Is there somebody you're rooting for in all this? I mean, after all those years, but is there someone that if they won, you'd be like, okay? Oh
yeah, well, I'm a film historian, so I do tend to appreciate those awards, like years ago, Paul Newman's Best Actor Award, after quite a few nominations, that did seem to be, quote, for the body of work. But I always want to make sure that the performance itself is memorable enough so that when audiences see it 20 or 30 years from now, when that person's sentimental status has sort of evaporated, that they would be able to say, this is really a good performance. And again, I'm going to cheat here a little bit. Laura Dern is absolutely my choice for that. And I think her performance in Marriage Story is really good. None of her performances have ever been extravagant, have ever been Meryl Streep in scope and size. So I think Marriage Story is a really good index of a talent that often gets overlooked because the emotional effects that she presents are so subtle. So I'm just thrilled to see her name in the list, and yeah, I hope she wins.
Both Marriage Story and Two Popes, Netflix.
Yeah.
We talked earlier about screen size. Nobody is seeing a Netflix film.
Yeah.
I mean, unless they've got a screening room.
Right.
And even then, so could you circle back to that, the whether it's the intimacy or what can matter about a screen size and a smaller viewing audience? If it's just you at your home or you and a couple people.
Well, the question of the smaller viewing audience is not only important for you and I as we're sitting maybe with 2 or 3 friends and watching a movie in our basement on our screen, but it also factors into the decision about greenlighting something. Netflix, even as big as Netflix is, it can still consider itself a niche production company. It can something like Marriage Story is simply easier for them to do, given their production and distribution model and the ways in which they seek profits, than it is for a so-called major studio to do. And in a way, the streaming services were previewed by the decision now 20 years ago or more from the so-called major distribution companies to open up themselves art film or niche sub-entities like Fox Searchlight Pictures to handle the unique advertising and marketing and booking needs, and even the unique producing needs of smaller scale films that aren't going to get audiences in the many, many millions, but that are in fact that do get good return on investment for the money spent on them, and that hit frankly demographics that are more valuable than the mass audience for the latest Star Wars episode.
We could do much more on Oscars, but I want to finish with a big, broad question.
Okay.
Why do movies matter? You teach hundreds of students a year. You've been consuming it for years in many forms yourself.
Yes. Uh-huh.
It's clearly a love, and we clearly care. Society cares. But why do they matter?
I think they matter. It's a great question. I think movies matter because of the stories they tell and the vividness with which those stories are told. Movies marshal so many different artistic, so many different arts in this, and put them all on the screen together. Visual design, audio design, performance, etc. Those are things that I and other people have talked about as being an attraction of the movies. But I think awards season shows that there's also an attraction about our ability and our interest in curating movies. That is, to be able to talk about our tastes in movies is something that is possible and enjoyable for absolutely everyone. It does not, I don't want to write myself out of a job here, but it does not require a college education, and certainly it doesn't require a college education in the study of film, in order to be an informed and enthusiastic and confident collector virtually of movies, and a curator of movies, and a connoisseur of movies. It's an area, I think, sports is the only parallel where it is simultaneously a mass, something that's available to us en masse, but at the same time capable of being treated as an expert's domain. And as you know, as we know here in the college with our sports journalism program, people are not shy about electing themselves experts in sports. Nor is anyone shy, nor should they be shy, about electing themselves an expert in what's a good movie. So I think it's the stories that movies tell, and the vividness, the emotional grasp that movie techniques have, that techniques in other art forms don't necessarily have. I think that's a big part of it, but I also think people love to be curators. They love to be connoisseurs. That's why social media asks us our likes. It's not just curious. It knows that that those likes have implications, and that they're a great way of answering the question, what kind of a person are you? Well, I'm the kind of person who likes Roma. Or I'm the kind of person who likes the Harry Potter franchise. Or I'm the kind of person who likes Marriage Story.
Cool. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Penn State Conversations. For more information about the Donald P. Bellisario College of Communications, including the latest news and upcoming events, visit bellisario.psu.edu or find us on social media at PSU Bellisario on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.